Welcome to the UN Brief. Today we interviewed Mr. Guido Broekhoven. He is Head of Policy Research and Development at the World Wildlife Foundation International at its European Policy Office in Brussels. He was in Geneva participating at the Conference on Biodiversity. We spoke about the role that the WWF plays in making sure that these treaties and protocols define well the going forward of the green economy, the lack of funding, or the necessity on bringing political will to the table. Thank you for watching and listening to the UN Brief, and don't forget to subscribe.
This has been the first meeting where parties and stakeholders have come together in person after 2 years of only virtual interactions. And it was quite clear from the beginning of the virtual situation that parties agreed to only have proper negotiations when they could meet in person again. So in a way, this is sort of a restarting of the negotiations of the Global Biodiversity Framework. So it is obvious that that would take some time in the beginning to pick up pace and to really get into the negotiations again. We're quite happy as WWF to see that there is growing consensus around what should be the global mission, the global sort of guiding light for this global biodiversity framework, which is converging around halving and reversing biodiversity loss by 2030. So really that halting and reversing is important, and to arrive at a nature positive world by 2030. And there's a growing number of parties that are supportive of that type of framing of the overall ambition of the global biodiversity framework. And that also then sets the ambition for all the other elements of the framework. Unfortunately, we've seen much less progress on virtually all the other elements of the framework. So it has been an intense 2 weeks, but because it is sort of a restarting of the negotiations, because it is a complex set of issues that need to be addressed and that is interrelated, there's been limited progress. I think it's also, unfortunately, due to an insufficient sense of urgency and it's about the biodiversity crisis that we are facing. So we're disappointed that although there's been some progress, that progress hasn't been as much as really is needed. And we now need to have a fourth meeting of these negotiations to be ready to arrive at COP15 with a text that is ready for adoption and then for immediate implementation after the COP, because it is important that all the essential elements will be adopted at the COP so that implementation can start afterwards.
You see is at the present the role of WWF in advancing implementation of these treaties and protocols?
Yeah, and I think there's three roles that we are playing. In these sorts of negotiations, we present our views, which are backed up by science. So we are telling parties and informing them what we believe is needed to address the biodiversity crisis. We also support countries by informing them about the process and the opportunities that exist and the benefits of addressing the biodiversity crisis. And thirdly, we're also informing the public and communicating with the public to let them know what is happening and to support our calls for greater urgency and ambition. And then finally, what is really important that needs to happen as well, that in addition to these sort of technical negotiations, there's a number of very sticky points that need to be addressed at a political level. So we're really calling upon politicians also to help unblock some of these issues that need political solutions and to put in place a political strategy to do so, so that progress on other important elements of the process will not be blocked by the sticky issues. Of course, we need more funding that goes into biodiversity conservation, but we also need to address the funding that goes to things that is bad for nature, that harms nature, and that includes huge amounts of harmful subsidies that go to agriculture, forestry, and some of the other sectors where subsidies are really bad for nature. And then there is the broader sort of role of the financial sector that supports investments in other activities such as infrastructure and fisheries, and that is bad for nature. We need to repurpose these investments to make them work for nature rather than against nature. And indeed, as I said, we need to increase funding directly going to nature conservation. That needs to come from all sources, public, private, domestic, and international. Having said that, it is not only an issue of funding, it is also an issue of addressing directly the drivers of nature loss. And we really are calling for a halving of the footprint of our production and consumption. And that is a global goal that we are calling for. Obviously, different countries have different ecological footprints. They have a different impact on biodiversity globally. So different countries also need to take different responsibilities there. It is the only way forward at this moment. We believe multilateralism is the only way to address a global crisis where countries and what they're doing so interconnected. You cannot address these issues in isolation. What is missing is, in particular at this stage, the sort of the political attention that's being paid to the nature crisis. What we hope that COP15 will be for nature is that it is similar what the Paris COP was for climate, that it really will be a pivotal moment where countries, parties come together to have an ambitious agreement that addresses the nature crisis at the same level as Paris did for climate.
Thank you for watching the UN Brief, and don't forget to subscribe. The UN Brief is funded by listeners like you. Thank you for watching and listening to the UN Brief.